Hello everyone, my name is Ashish and welcome to the Academy channel. So today I am going to start a new series of interview questions and answer on the topic of Spring Boot. And in this series we are going to discuss the most important and the frequent asked questions on a Spring Boot topic. So yeah, so the first question which you may get is like, what is a Spring Boot? So basically, a Spring Boot is a open source and a microservice based Java web like framework, and the Spring Boot framework creates a fully production ready environment that is completely configurable using its pre-built code within a code base. So basically, a Spring Boot is a module of a Spring framework, and it is used to create your project in a very faster manner. So it is used to create in a rapid application development, right? So Spring Boot is a project that is built upon on the top of a Spring framework, and Spring Boot is just the extension of the already existing and expansive Spring framework. So we know that a Spring framework is very expensive. So why we call a Spring framework expensive? Because if you have used a Spring framework in your project, then you might know that it is a very tidy job to add all the downloaded jars in your class path, and also you have to maintain a separate XML configuration file for doing the operations like for the development you have to deploy in a separate server, and then again let's say that you want to connect with a database, then you have to put the jar of the database in a separate class path, and then also you have to maintain xml file configuration file uh, for for the connectivity with a database. So Spring framework is very expensive process, but it has some specific feature that make the application easier for working within the developer ecosystem, right? So the Spring Boot extension include the pre-configurable web starter kits that help to facilitate the responsibilities of an application server that are required for other Spring project. So basically, it provides an easier and a faster way to do the setup and to configure and run both simple and the web-based application. So with a Spring Boot, we can run both simple and a web-based application. So it is used to create a stand-alone Spring-based application. So with the Spring Boot, we can create a stand-alone application. So can simply build the application jar and run the application with no need of customize the development, right? So a simple standalone application can be created using a Spring Boot. So Spring Boot is a combination of Spring Framework and a embedded server. So what is a Spring Boot? So Spring Boot equals to Spring Framework plus the embedded server. So here the embedded server means that Spring Boot comes up with a pre-built Tomcat, JT, and the Undertow application server that do not require further installation to use. So this also provide a faster and a more efficient development resulting to shortening restart time. So Spring Boot has its inbuilt server, and the server are like Tomcat and the JT server and the Undertow servers. So which are faster and a very high like processing feature, right? So Spring Boot, so in Spring Boot there is no requirement for XML configuration. It is like auto configure, and it requires a very list configuration, right? So in a one way, in a one word, you can say that a Spring Boot is a module which comes from a Spring framework, and it is used for a rapid application development. It provides inbuilt embedded servers like Tomcat, JT, and the Undertow, by which you don't need to require to deploy your application in a external servers because it has inbuilt a server, right? So this is all about a Spring Boot. So the next question which you may get, why should we use a Spring Boot framework? So this is a very important questions, that why should we use a Spring Boot framework? So Spring Boot has a number of features that make it great fit for a quickly developing Java application. It includes auto configuration, health checkups, and it is opinionated dependencies. So, so the dependency injection approach is used in a Spring Boot. So what is a dependency injection approach? So dependency injection is a approach in which the developer does not have to create the object of a class. So so the Spring Boot, the web container do for it. So for this we use a AutoWire, right? So AutoWire annotation is used for creating the object of the class, and the web container do for us. As a developer, we don't require to create the object. So only as a developer we need to ask the web container that we require this reference or the object of this class, so that we can use the method or the variable of that class. So this is a dependency injection, right? So Spring Boot uses the DI approach. So Spring Boot is a Spring module that provides rapid application development, which we have already discussed. So it contains a powerful database transactions management capabilities. It simplifies integrations with other Java frameworks like JPA and the Hibernate, ORM, struts, etc. So we can integrate easily these features with a Spring Boot. It reduces the cost and the development time of the application. It has, and also it is a auto configurable, right? So it provides a health checkup and the matrix and the externalized like configuration. So this is why the Spring Boot framework is very useful. So with the Spring Boot framework, we can create a REST API and we can create a microservice, right? So these are the some point which you can say while in interview, that why we can use a Spring Boot. So the first point is that it it is used for rapid application development, right? It uses the DI approach. Second, it contains powerful database transaction management capabilities. It is auto configurable, right? We can simply integrate the other features of the Java frameworks like JPA, Hibernate, ORM, struts, etc. It reduces cost and development time for the application, right? So now let's move to the third question, that what are the advantages of a Spring Boot? So the advantage of a Spring Boot is that we can create a standalone like a Spring application that can be started with a Java jar. It provides inbuilt web application by which we can easily test application with the help of different embedded HTTP servers such as Tomcat, JT, etc. We don't need to deploy the WAR file. Like I said, that it provides inbuilt web like servers like Tomcat, JT, and Undertow. So we don't require to deploy our application into the external servers, right? It provide opinionated starter form to simplify our like the Maven configuration. So why we called Spring Boot as a opinionated starter? So opinionated is a software design pattern that decide or guide you into the way of doing things. So Spring Boot is opinionated because it follows the opinionated default configuration that reduces the developer effort to configure the application. So let's say, for example, if I will give you an example, let's say that if you include uh, so let's say that if you include in a Spring Boot starter form for a JPA, right? So you will get the auto configured for you in an yeah, like you will get the in memory database, and also you will get the Hibernate entity manager, and also with the simple data sources, right? So Spring says, so for Spring, the opinion that is a good starter point. So with the Spring Boot, it is a good starter point which you can use. Although it provide a feature if you want to ignore any data source or exclude any data source. So there is also a way to exclude any data source or any jar to be get started in the starting point, right? So a default configuration that can be like override, right? So with a Spring Boot, it provide a good starting point. So that's why it is called as a opinionated. It provides the production ready feature such as a matrix, health checkups, and the actionalized configurations, right? So there is no requirement for XML configuration as we have seen in a Spring framework. It offers a CLI tool for developing and testing the Spring Boot application. It offers number of extra like it offers the extra like a plugins to to develop the application in a faster manner. It also minimizes writing multiple boiler codes. So what is boiler code? The code that has to be included in many places with a little or a no alteration. And also it also minimizes the XML configuration and also the annotations. It increases the productivity and reduces the development time. So these are the some of the important point regarding the advantages of using the Spring Boot. So let's move to the next question like that what is the goal of a Spring Boot? So the main goal of a Spring Boot is to reduce the development time. It is used for rapid application development. It reduces the unit testing and the integration test time. It provide opinionated development approach as we have discussed what is opinionated development approach. It avoid defining more annotation configuration, avoid writing lots of import statement, avoid adding Spring jars in a class path as we do in a Spring framework. So here in a Spring Boot, we don't require to add the Spring jars in a class path. It avoid XML configurations also. So, so these are the goal of a Spring Boot, right? Yeah. So these are the some of the theory interview questions which you may get, right? So in the next lecture we are going to see the more interview questions like Spring versus Spring Boot, and also I'm going to explain the whole architecture of a Spring Boot, and also we are going to see what happens when the Spring get started, right? So there are like more important questions which I will discuss in the next question like lecture. So in the end I will show you how we can create like a Spring Boot like application or a project by using a Spring Initializer. So let's move to our Chrome. So here the Spring Boot like also provide a website called a start.spring.io. So it is a Spring Initializer through which you can create the Spring Boot application or a project. So here in a project, you can select any of this like Maven project or a Gradle project. So for now, I will use a Maven project, and also the language you can choose like Java, Kotlin, or the Groovy. So I will use Java. So these are the Spring Boot versions. And in the group, you can give the name, and also in the artifact and the name of the project you can provide. So this is a description and the packaging, like how you are going to use this package as a jar or as a var. And the Java version, like you can provide. And also here you can add the dependencies. So directly I have added some of the dependencies like Spring Wave, Spring Dev Tool, Spring Data JPA, and the Lombok. So here, by clicking on the add dependencies, you can add more like dependencies which you want. For the wave, you can use Spring Reactive Wave. If you want to use the GraphQL, then you can add these dependencies. And if you want to use a Spring Session, then you have to add these dependencies. So there are like lots of other, yeah. So let's say that you want to use for the UI purpose, then you can use the theme lib. So theme libs allows HTML to be correctly displayed in a browser, right? And also there are other like let's say that if you want to use security, then you can use Spring Security. So there are like many like modules are there which you can add directly, and it will go to your pom.xml, right? So so for now I have added some of the dependencies, And yeah, and after adding here you can click on the generate button. So it will like download the project in a zip format, and after that you need to extract the project. So I will extract it here itself, and now I will go to my Eclipse and I will try to import this project over my Eclipse. So here you can provide the directory, desktop, and yeah, and by selecting this extracted project, you have to select and then you have to click on open. So I have opened this like Spring Boot project in my Eclipse, and now I will show you the classes of this. So yeah, so this is a Spring Boot tutorial. So here you can see, if I will open this project, then here you will see a source folder. So in the source folder, our like Java classes will be there, and there is a pom.xml, right? So in the pom.xml, all the dependencies which I have added has come here. So Java 1.8 I am using, right? So this is the Spring Boot starter parent uh, like dependencies, and also the data JPA and the wave and the dev tool and the lombok, right? So these are the all dependencies which has just added in the pom.xml, and this is the source folder and this is the main folder, and here inside the Java you can create your packages and you can write your controller and the repository and the model class and all, right? And this is the main class. So in the main class, you can see I started with a Spring Boot application, right? And here this is the main method. So this is the structure of a Spring Boot application or a project. So the more we will discuss in the next lecture, in the upcoming lecture. So thank you and have a nice day. See you in the next lecture.